but there is a remnant of where there was worship taking place in Afghanistan.
I remember it was Easter Sunday, and we decided to go up on the roof of the church building, surrounded by mountains covered in snow. We had a sunrise worship service up on the roof, and it's a little bit different when people are singing and praising God and they just lost a friend or somebody's gotten injured. And they're worried about the next mission that they might go out on. You feel like you're surrounded by darkness, but then there's this you can be a light, and it's so much brighter in those dark areas.
Yeah, light is so much brighter when there is darkness around you.
I mean, you really feel the evil around you. But yeah, the sound of the speakers echoing through the mountains, and like being able to do that in even in an area where we'd had rocket attacks and attacks on the base, being kind of out there in the open, just doing this sunrise service, I was like, this is pretty amazing.
All right, hey guys, it's Ciaran here with the Wise Fools podcast. I've got Jordan with me. We've just finished being at his place, and hey, I've had this podcast up ready to go for a while, but haven't released it. But something that I want to encourage you with is before you begin listening is I've really realised a lot of what Jordan spoke about a couple months ago. I've actually applied in my life, in leadership, in my family, and I've actually seen the fruit of that in my life. So I'm really excited to share it with you because I think a lot of what he does share in the podcast will really help you with where you're at. So I want to thank Jordan for being in it. Got any words, mate?
That was really good. I hope that you guys enjoy this. You can pull something out of it, a collection of a whole bunch of things that people poured into me over the years, and I'm happy to hear that some of that has been useful for you, and I hope you guys enjoy it.
All right, enjoy.
So, thanks, Jordan, for coming today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I was thinking about doing an intro for you, but I figured it's actually a lot easier to ask the guest for them to explain who they are.
Yeah.
So, do you mind just telling us a little bit about who you are, be your background?
Sure. My name's Jordan Lester. I'm here in Australia as an exchange officer with the U.S. Army. So I'm a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, and my kind of trade is logistics. So I've been doing that for almost 18 years, and it's been really great to come over here to Australia and spend about 3 years with my whole family to do that with Australia and be part of kind of that relationship that exists between the U.S. and Australia. So, but I've had a bunch of different jobs. Logistics is kind of a broad field of profession, but it's been something that I've been very interested in kind of my whole life. I grew up on a big farm in Virginia, and there's a lot of logistics that goes into that. So, I think that set me up and made me think about how to plan and put things in the right place at the right time. And build and work with teams, because you can't really do any of that stuff by yourself. You have to work with teams of other teams and kind of build relationships with folks that are going to help you out when something doesn't go exactly to plan. So yeah, that's a real brief intro to who I am and kind of what I'm doing.
You have kids, you have a wife.
Yep. Yeah, my wife, Michelle, we've been together for 11 years, and we have 3 kids. And they're 10, 8, and 4, almost 5. So they're still pretty young. They're enjoying being out here in Australia and hanging out with the animals and that kind of stuff. And we spend a lot of our time when I'm not working or when the kids are not in school, going to travel around Australia and around the region to see, this beautiful part of the world that most people don't get to see very much of if they don't live in this area. I've even talked to a lot of Australians who are like, hey, you've seen more of Australia than I have. So I'm like, okay.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
I've been all the way around Australia, and I always say to people, there's plenty to look at in Australia.
Yeah.
It's very different in many places. But we're also lucky to have you for the years we've had you. We've only got you for less than a year still here in Canberra.
That's right, yeah.
So
yeah, it was originally a 2-year job assignment,
right.
and I was able to request another year added on to that. So it'll be a little short of 3 years because I just found out where I'm going next. We're going to head back to North Carolina in May of next year.
And what are you doing there? Just give a bit of a brief. What's your next posting?
My next job will be battalion commander for a brigade support battalion. So still doing logistics, but working with junior leaders again, working with young soldiers again, and supporting a fires brigade. So it's a brigade that basically works for 18th Airborne Corps directly to provide corps level fires, and that's like long range weapons.
So you're providing the weapons, like
Providing
logistically,
support for it.
support for them. And how many soldiers will you be training?
It's going to be usually a BSB is between 600 and 800 people. I'll find out kind of a little bit more about it in the next few months.
To pretty much be like a CEO of a company, essentially.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, because I managed about like 6 people at work.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
And there's
600.
lots of smaller teams too, which is one of the really exciting parts of it. There's companies that fall within each battalion, and each company has a company commander as well. So,
yeah, cool.
I remember really fondly what it was like to be a company commander, and I always thought, like, I hope I get a chance to command again, because it's a different kind of leadership challenge, and it's very rewarding. But you have to, I mean, there's a lot of weight on the commander. So I think a lot of what we do in our leadership development programs and stuff are preparing people for those moments where they get to actually lead soldiers or command units.
Right. Well, this all started because it was a Sunday, because we're part of the same church.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were talking about serving.
Yep.
And there's a verse in Mark 10 that talks about, if you want to be a leader, then you must serve. You must be a slave. A reference that Jesus is saying to his disciples. And I don't know, there was some sort of like Q&A or something going on at the end, or like people sharing their thoughts, and then you spoke up and just said, in my own role in the army, like I try and take on that role of a servant leader, which is how it all started. So maybe we'll just dive straight into that first.
Yeah.
When you say that, because in that same verse, actually I might just read it out because I've got it up.
Yeah.
When you try and verbatim like scripture, but you realize just reading the thing is actually the best way to explain it. So right here it says, Jesus says to the disciples, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So I assume in that context, he's talking about the Roman soldiers that rule it over them. Why don't you lead that way? Is that not the way that you're trained to? Isn't it very hierarchical in the army? Like, yeah.
I mean, it makes sense in that context, because like there's a couple different ways you could get a result out of a team that you're leading. Like one way would be like the Roman way and threaten people's lives and that kind of stuff. I guess I think that may be like the worldly expected way of a leader to actually impose their will on the people that they're leading and make them do that thing out of fear or out of just compliance and that kind of thing. And there's some, I think, human tendencies that show up in even today's modern military around that, where it's like, hey, I'm in charge. You do what you do what I say. And there are some contexts where you really do want your team to respond immediately to your direction. Like being in a combat situation, you don't have time for questions. You need folks to actually do that.
Yeah.
But I've personally found that that's really only something you can develop through trust. And the leadership philosophy that we talked about a little bit earlier was servant leadership, which builds trust. People understand that you're actually trying to help them succeed as individuals. You care about them. You want them to feel like they're a part of the team, feel like they're part of something bigger, and if they have ambitions to maybe go and do something at a higher rank or a different level, you're helping them on their journey to get to a higher level.
So
can
can you just paint a picture very specifically? Because I have a personal interest in this, because I find myself leading people. So when I hear the term servant leadership, helping people, I'm like, what does that actually translate into? And like in your context, how does that look opposed to leading in this other way where it's, hey, just do what I say?
Right.
Which that's my impression of the military, to be honest with you. It's kind of why I didn't want to join, because I'm sort of like the question guy. So like, what does that really look like? Like serving, like Jesus washed the disciples' feet, for example, and he led them. He was still very firm on what is true,
Yeah.
but at the same time, he was a servant.
I think it looks like, for me, it looks like actually thinking about how you can serve someone else, how you can almost put yourself in their position, have a lot more empathy, have a lot more like value their opinion, make sure that the things that they're seeing are validated almost, and like not just standing there and be like, hey, I have more experience, I know everything, I don't need your opinion, I don't
So
need your
listening's
input.
key.
Yeah, listening's key. Talking about things other than just work things, talking about their family, talking about things that they care about, understanding what their hobbies are, kind of what makes their mind work. Because everybody is so different in the way they approach a problem or the way they approach their work. Like if you don't know that about your team members, then you're going to miss out on the strengths that they might bring with a different perspective. So I think that spending time and genuinely trying to know and help the people that are working for you, it creates a different kind of team. It actually unlocks some of the reservations that a person, especially in a military context, a subordinate, lower ranking person might not want to share their opinion with a higher ranking officer. They might be afraid to do that, afraid to be wrong, that kind of stuff. And that applies in probably any profession. But you want to build that trust that they're free to say, hey, sir, I see something that could be a real problem, and nobody else sees that thing, but they have the courage to bring it up, and they know that they're going to be listened to, and that's going to be considered in the right time. Because like I said, there are some times where everyone needs to take, even if it's an 80% good plan, and go ahead and do it, because it'd be more dangerous to change it at the last minute.
So you're saying then you build trust in a way where those who you're leading will feel comfortable approaching you with their ideas and views, which would therefore probably improve what you're actually doing sometimes, not all the time. Well, then what's the opposite of that? Like, have you seen in your time, you don't have to name names, like where you're in an environment, or maybe you've been led by someone who you don't feel like you can approach them? What did they not do, or what did they do that, showed that they were sort of ruling over, they weren't there to serve in that way?
There's a few characteristics that cause people to kind of shut down. Intimidation type stuff. Maybe it's just really subtle, like always adding value. That's something that I actually have done in the past. I'll be sitting in a meeting and somebody has an idea, and then I add on top of it because I'm the one running the meeting.
Right.
So there's some subtle things that you can accidentally do to shut down your team, and they're like, okay, he's not really interested in what we're talking about, or he's already got it figured out. And that's not the impression that I want to give when I'm putting a team together to solve a hard problem. I want everyone to feel like they can raise an issue, or raise an observation, or maybe make a comparison to something we've done before. Because those moments where maybe we're just drawing on a whiteboard or sketching out ideas of how to solve a problem, those are the moments that frame the problem and actually make it solvable. So you can see where you may only be looking at a symptom of the problem and trying to solve that, but it's not really going to solve the root of the problem. And it takes a team, and we talk about building teams that are full of diverse backgrounds, diverse ideas. That's where I think you have almost like a superpower team, where you have all these different people that don't agree with each other. Like, I don't want a whole bunch of people on my team that that's the best idea, and they are just all constantly agreeing with what I'm saying. I guarantee you the plan's not going to be as good as if I had a whole bunch of people telling me that they don't agree. And then we work through that, and we come up with something that's a mixture of all those ideas, and that strengthens the team too, because then the junior officers and folks that contributed to it, sometimes the non-commissioned officers and enlisted brand new soldiers, have ideas that they see in the final plan. Like, oh yeah, that was my idea, and that's in the final plan. And that actually gives a lot more credibility to the leader and the plan itself, because they're willing to go ahead with it because they see a part of their idea in it.
So what you're describing is it works to lead this way,
Yeah.
but there is a way to get results as well through more of that fear-driven like tactic. So it works. That's a good reason to lead this way.
Mm-hmm.
But why do you want to lead in this servant way? Like what motivates you to lead in that way?
I think if I'm being honest, I've personally been led that way, and I've been led the other way. So I remember what it feels like to be talked to like I have, no good ideas. I shouldn't be contributing. And I remember what it feels like to be really a part of the team and really contributing to that outcome. And I think it's sort of a normal like human response to know that your leader cares about you. And I've had a lot of really good leaders that have showed me what that looks like. And I actually haven't had too many of the bad ones that you're referencing. I've been very fortunate. I think most Army officers who've been in for as long as I have would tell you a story about a person that they directly worked for that made them want to get out of the Army or something like that. I have not had that experience with a direct leader. I've seen it happening kind of on the side a little bit with other folks, and some of that is a little bit of my approach that the person that's in a leadership position is there for a reason, and I'm also meant to serve them. So my philosophy because most of the time you're not the commander, most of the time you're just a staff officer or you're part of the team. My philosophy in those moments is to make sure that commander is successful and to serve that person who's got that weight and responsibility of command, and they're accountable for things that go wrong, and they really don't get to take credit for anything that goes right. They just pass that out to the team. And you hear it all the time. It's like where leaders will be like, "Hey, this went wrong. This is on me. I'll fix it." And then when something goes right, the leader will be like, "Hey, this is not me. This is my team." So you really have that responsibility as the leader to sort of be accountable for the bad stuff and distribute the credit for all the good stuff. So when you're not that leader, it's important to know that you're not, and you're serving those leaders in that way as well.
Well, this is both ways.
Yeah. Like they call it, being a good leader starts with being a good follower, things like that. And it sort of sounds like a cliche, but it puts that leadership role kind of up in a special category.
So when just what you just said there, to be a good leader, you must be first a good follower. I was thinking around that concept of submission. It's not a very popular word, but it's used in scripture, and it's this idea of you submitting to the person who's in authority, and there's like different submission all throughout society. Like I see it like there's hierarchy because it brings safety. Like someone needs to be responsible, and then someone needs to submit to that authority. And what we see in the Bible as one form of submission is this idea of submitting to even the government, which was a hard one during COVID, I think, for people, and it was kind of confusing to understand that. But in your context, you have to submit to, we all have to submit to managers in normal work. In your context, ultimately you submit to leaders, but then you have to submit like even to the president. So just speak to that for a second, like how important it is to learn how to submit to leadership, even when you don't fully agree with what's being decided. Like, how do you do that well?
I think it starts with, for every Army officer, it starts with the oath that you take when you commission as an officer to support and defend the Constitution and obey the orders of the President of the United States. That's what we signed up to do. And then in the U.S. context, the military is subservient to the civilian leadership, and that's the way it was set up. And it creates balance because you don't want the military to be more powerful than the civilian government. We've seen lots of examples throughout history where that happens, and then the military attempts to take over. The U.S. was set up in a way where the military is always going to be advising senior leaders. So as an officer, sometimes you'll be asked to provide your best military advice to a civilian leader, and then they're the ones who are charged with making the decision. And then you support the decision that it's made because that is the way that's the way it's ordered, and it's structured that way on purpose. And there's also been military leaders that have gotten that out of balance, and they're quickly relieved of their duties, because that balance has to be maintained between the military and civilian leadership. As far as like obeying the orders of the president, and the president changes potentially every 4 years for us, that's a question I get a lot. Like, hey, what if you don't agree with this president? What if you don't like this president? That kind of thing. Or who do you vote for? How do you think about that? And I still go back to that sort of servant role, the way you described it, is that whoever gets elected is my boss. That's who that I've sworn to support. And they're going to have moments where they need the best military advice from the best advisors that they can bring around them. So it doesn't do me any good, or it doesn't do the country any good if all the military leaders just turn their back on the president. Like, they need good military advice. They need wise counsel. They need a good team, just like I need a good team. So if I'm doing something that erodes the ability for the president to make good decisions, whether I agree with the decision or not, then I'm really not serving them well. And so,
well, I've got a prickly question for you. Like, what if? So right now there's a war in Ukraine. There's a war between Israel and Palestine. There's been previous wars like in Afghanistan, Iraq. There's a lot of controversy. There always is around war. Like, how do you do your job and support war efforts when perhaps you feel like it's not being done the way it should be, or you shouldn't even be there in the first place, for example?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I think it helps to think about. Is the reason why you went into that war, is that a good reason? Was it a just reason? Because I think any war in history you would hope would be started to result in a better peace on the other side of it. I mean, that's kind of the philosophy that I take with why do we have warfare and that kind of stuff. There are things that are worth fighting for to result in a better peace on the other side.
So war is for the sake of peace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the actual, if you look at different wars that are judged by historians, that's usually that's one of the measures that they apply. Was there a just reason to go into that war? Because if there was, the result of the war is actually not as important as the reason that it started. And that kind of goes back to your prickly questions. Like, okay, well, there were some of these wars that we're talking about, you just listed, that either were seen as unjust in retrospect, or there wasn't enough evidence to say that the claims that got us into those wars were right. And then there's some that are ongoing right now, which, history will judge those as well. So I think that's my perspective, is that some things in the moment look like something else, but then as they unfold, you have to wait for.
We have the benefit of hindsight,
the time,
right?
Yeah.
So we're all sitting here watching these wars in hindsight, going, "That was a stupid war."
Yeah.
Like that was.
And I've read books about, like, for example, what happened in the Bush White House right after 9/11, or during it. There was a lot of fear there. Like, 'cause they didn't know if that was going to continue to happen, if there was going to be more attacks. Like, they had no idea that it was just one. It was one attack on the World Trade Center, one attack on the Pentagon, and another plane that was.
That was enough.
Yeah, but
that was still significant.
That's a lot, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But they didn't know if it was going to continue for weeks and months, and like they had no idea exactly what kind of insider threat or whatever was going to happen. So, I think it was useful to. Like you said, judging people kind of hindsight, it was useful to see the humanity in that moment and to see how much obviously they were afraid. It makes sense. They're not.
What was the feeling of the whole?
So.
Well, yeah. But what was the feeling? Like, because I think you were in high school, weren't you?
Yeah.
You said to me, like, what was the feeling when 9/11 happened?
I was in. We call it junior ROTC, which is a high school version of the Reserve Officer Training Corps.
So you're already on the path to going into the Army.
Yeah, you're not technically in the military, but you're doing things almost like a trade school to prepare you to join the military after you finish high school. And I was in 11th grade. So I was getting towards the point where I think I'd already gotten, or I was already applying for a scholarship to go to college and do the same thing. And we basically felt like we were going to war, because like an attack on the country that you can see on TV, that's never happened before, and at the scale of like Pearl Harbor or something like that, which was long, before anybody that was sitting in the room was alive. So it was definitely confronting. And once it became obvious that it was a terrorist attack, it was a really quiet moment in the room, because we'd all sort of thought that we would join the military after we finished that course. And so we kind of started to get a glimpse of what our future might look like.
So your mindset at that point, you're being trained to go into the military, this happens. Was it more of a motivation to join, or did part of you go, wow, this is real? Like, I could be heading into a time where there is a full world war happening. Like,
right.
That was the feel of it. Like,
I think my initial reaction was, I want to help.
Yeah.
And that's sort of I still to this day, if something bad is happening or if something is difficult, I want to help, hopefully make it just a little bit better. And maybe that's where that started in me. But it was just, I didn't have any kind of reservations about the path that I was on. I was like, it almost validated the reason why we need to have a strong military. We need to have people that are prepared to go and do hard things and put their life in danger to protect the country, protect the thing that we really value. And at the time, I hadn't visited a lot of other countries. I didn't really know how valuable the freedom that we enjoy is. But, now looking back after visiting countries all over the world and going to places where they don't have any freedom, they don't have any kind of agency over their own life, they don't have the opportunity to work hard and be successful, it is very valuable, and it's kind of rare.
That's hard for me to fathom too. I think when we've grown up in countries where we have that, we don't really relate to the idea of not having it. Like, we take it for granted a lot of the time. And I was thinking recently, like, because we haven't had I'm thinking about the generation that went through World War II and just who they were as characters and the way they viewed life. And I think that in some sense, our generation, although there has been wars, not at that level though, we're still a bit sheltered from the reality of what evil is and what the world can be and what can be taken. And, we take things for granted as well. I think COVID was an interesting time where things were taken, not in a war context, but where we realized that life is not just this sort of sheltered thing, that anything can happen. There can be a war that starts and all of a sudden the whole world is in this great conflict and lots of people are dying and there is a threat from other countries to take over, it's far-fetched to be able to imagine it when you haven't been through it, but it's like that can actually happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think the two examples you mentioned, like Israel and Ukraine, that population, those people are experiencing that right now. I've heard lots of stories that I even talked to one Ukrainian officer that I met, and this was before the invasion, and he was pretty scared. He was like, I know this is going to happen and I don't know if we're ready. And obviously they're outmatched. So, but the population in some of the bigger cities just going on their normal day, going out to grab a coffee and then things start happening. Like they probably never would have imagined what's going on right now.
Was that the vibe in Afghanistan as well? Like obviously very different context. They're still, I guess Afghanistan's been in like conflict for a long time, like historically, but what are the general population like there? Like you've been to Afghanistan, you were posted there. Like, what's the feel in that country?
Yeah,
from your perspective.
I mean, I've been to Afghanistan twice, and the first time was back in 2010. It was during a time of the U.S. and the rest of the NATO coalition was surging forces into Afghanistan. So it was the highest numbers
Peak.
The peak of that conflict. And then I went back to shut down all the U.S. bases in Afghanistan towards the very end. So it was, trailing down to very minimal numbers, and that was 21 time frame. So those time periods were about 10 years apart. So I got to see the country and interact with some of the local people in two different contexts. But I think it struck me the first time I was there how much they value the same things that we value, like family, being able to provide for their family. They want to have security. They want to have safety. It's all the different. They want to have food. Some of the same needs that you'd find anywhere else in the world. It's a whole lot more. They're a whole lot more similar to us than I think I realized. Even though they have a very, very different lifestyle, especially in Afghanistan, where things are. It's like going back in some areas, like going back 1,000 years in time, and houses are built out of mud and things like that. And then there are bigger cities that are a lot more modern. But I think the general feel that I got from the population was that they were in sort of survival mode in the middle of a war zone. I mean, they needed to do what they needed to do to protect their family or to make enough money to feed their family or whatever that was. And some of it looked pretty desperate. And we would probably look at things that people did to survive as like maybe unethical, or, we would apply our particular context or our worldview to some of that. But at the root of it, it's more like survival and protecting those core things that you really value. And that's what I noticed definitely on the first trip going out there, working with Australians for the first time in a
You just realised, although I haven't asked my brother-in-law yet specifically, but it looks like you guys were there pretty much at the same time, working under one of the same generals.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It is crazy. It's incredibly small world in some aspects. Like, one of the guys I was working with there, I just caught up with him for a meal the other night. He's here in Canberra, and it was just really amazing to work with somebody, be a part of their team for 10 months or so, and then all of a sudden almost saying goodbye and feeling like you're never going to see him again because he's an Australian Air Force officer and I'm going back to the US.
And then here you are.
And then here I am.
That's cool.
Being able to just catch up and talk about some of the good people. And our conversation was all about the people on our team, but it was also about some of the Afghans that we worked with, contractors and all the support personnel that worked on the base. A lot of them were locals, and some of them were just young folks like us trying to figure out how they were going to survive and how they're going to learn a new skill that they might be able to use in this new country that they really believed in.
I actually met I think he was a translator from Afghanistan, right? When that all happened, when the US, Australian, and all the other allies left, and he was on that plane essentially.
Oh, wow.
And he was wearing an Australian Army hat, and I said, where did you get that? And he said, I got that when I came to Australia and did some training, and then he'd gone back to Afghanistan, and then by the grace of God he actually was on that plane, because not everyone was, that actually helped during that time. And now lives in Canberra. I think there was a bunch that landed here in Canberra. My brother-in-law was actually from Afghanistan. I don't know if I've told you that before. And we know a lot of people that are from Afghanistan. And I remember when all that happened, and a lot of the refugees when they came over, because our church actually at the time was quite active in supporting a lot of the families, and you could just see how sad they were and how confronted they were about what had taken place, where essentially there's this war going on for so long to try and combat against the Taliban, and then all of a sudden it just looks like it was a complete waste of time, and it's all over within no time. So I know I've already asked you privately, but how do you feel about what happened in the end in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I think it took me a while to think about how I felt about it, because like I was saying, I was there twice, and the second time was to close everything down and to get everything out. And as a logistics officer, it's not very often that you become the main effort for an operation or that your team is the main effort. And what that really means is everyone is supporting you on achieving your mission in that particular time frame. So from a professional standpoint, to be involved in, one of the largest logistics retrograde missions in history, we knew at the time it was a historical moment. We knew it was a hard moment for a lot of the guys we were supporting, because it was mostly special operations teams that were still there at the time. And even talking to some of those guys, they're like, no, we're not really leaving, are we? And it was hard for them to think about because they were all partnered with Afghan Army and those types of folks. So they felt a little bit like they were abandoning their team, their Afghan teammates. And
Well, from the outside, that's what it looked like, to be honest.
yeah.
Yeah.
And when I was over there as part of a planning team to plan the closure of all the bases, and then as we got towards kind of the April timeframe, President Biden announced that we were going to go ahead and get everything out. And that's when they told me and a bunch of folks on my team that we're going to stay until everything was closed. So now as a planner, I had the opportunity to execute the plan that I made, that I was working with a large team to make, that's professionally rewarding too, to see how it goes. Like sometimes you make a plan and either it never gets used or somebody else uses the plan to do.
And when you say plan,
operation.
the plan was get every soldier out, get all equipment out.
Yeah, it was to go to zero essentially. So 0 people, 0 equipment, contractors, and that was, because if you plan for the hardest thing, then if it's something less than that, it's a little, you've already got a plan to go to 0. So if there was going to be some sort of left behind capability, that was still achievable. So you always try to plan for the hardest thing.
But in the end, there was quite a lot of equipment and stuff like that was left behind.
Yeah, and some of that was part of the plan too.
Okay.
Like if something was not cost effective to move back, or if it was something we could actually hand over and gift officially to the Afghan army,
which was the kind of plan that they would somehow defend their own.
Right.
Yep.
Wanted them to have the best chance they could during that time to stand up and continue to fight. So a lot of it was around what did we have the authority to leave back and what must we take out. And some of that became, a list of priorities. We didn't have control of the roadways. We couldn't guarantee security on a lot of the roads anymore because the size of the force was so small. So pretty much everything had to fly out. So if you think about how many airplanes it would take to basically close down 20 cities that have been built over about 20 years, it's a lot of cargo flights leaving.
And full of like tanks and you name it. Like
I mean, at the time, I think we moved some, like a single piece of equipment that was filled up an entire C-17, and it weighed about, I think it was like 30 tons, 40 tons, something like that. And it was a big piece of material handling equipment. There was military fighting vehicles that we could put 1 or 2 on a flight, but also just like pallets and pallets and pallets of cargo and ammunition and things that were just not authorized to be handed over. And then there's also a way that we can demilitarize things and dispose of it in the country. So we had those methods as well. But pretty much everything, we had to create lists of every item that needed to leave. So we had a large Excel trackers of every single item. And then we had to go through those lists and figure out how to properly either hand it over, dispose of it, or get it on a flight to get it out. And of all the lists that we managed, there was only, I think, 3 items out of like thousands and thousands of items that we just couldn't get out, that we wanted to get out. And that was based on, we're removing a container with a helicopter trying to fly it off the side of a mountain. The container was breaking apart, and we had to end up blowing it in place on the ground. And there was a tower that was attached to the side of a mountain, and there was no safe way to get it down. So we took some of the equipment, electronics and stuff off the tower, and then just left the structure there.
Yeah.
Even though we wanted to bring the structure down.
So a lot of that stuff that was left intentionally.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the kind of like news headlines or things I've heard is, the stuff was like there's all these expensive equipment left there, but that there was actually some intentionality in the
yeah. I mean, some of it was expensive when we bought it,
Yeah,
but,
right.
And some of it was valuable still,
Yep.
and we wanted to hand it over. But the thing that we couldn't leave was anything that was like sensitive, classified material, that kind of thing. And I think we did a pretty good job with that. I've heard reports that there were some things that may have been left behind, but that was long after we left. and it's hard to clean out. Like, imagine moving out of your house and like making sure you
20
got
things.
everything, and
That's
and you're also
crazy.
being chased out by the landlord.
There's probably like in your career never gonna, well, we don't know, but never gonna be something like a project like that in terms of your specialty being logistics. Like that's probably going to be the biggest role you've played, like in like that kind of project.
It definitely,
moving 20 cities.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah, I think it was 22 bases that we were able to close.
Yeah, right.
In about 7 months, and
that was all because of the commitment politically that this is when we're going to get out, so this has to happen.
And there was a plan to close down Kabul. That was the one that everyone saw on TV that fell at the end, and that was after our team had left. But that was part of the original plan, was to close all the bases, close Kabul, and then close Bagram. But the kind of idea was that if we kept a State Department presence, U.S. Embassy in Kabul, the government would be able to stand a little bit longer, the Afghan government, and it would give the political process a little bit longer to try to work itself out. There was some negotiations going on at the time, and even though from a military standpoint, we didn't know how that was going to go. We kind of were anticipating the fall of the government, and we were really worried about the timeline of that, because you don't want the government to collapse in the middle of us closing all those other bases, because then we'd have no structure, no security, no agreement, no even reason to be there, because all those reasons why a U.S. force is allowed to be in a country are all political agreements. And
of course, yeah.
So if all that collapses and everything starts closing in on you, and you're still trying to get all that equipment out and all those people out safely, that's where, you kind of saw what it looked like in Kabul, right? So the collapse of the government happened, and then the final closure of that airfield in Kabul was very chaotic. And I talked to my team, and it goes back to like, how do you lead a team through difficult times? And that same team that was with me, I went back with, and some of them were having a real hard time with that moment, because it was a just on TV catastrophic failure. It looked like, and it was hectic. People were dying. U.S. soldiers were getting killed. And I was just trying to reassure my team, as bad as that looked at one location, imagine if we hadn't been able to close the 22 other bases. It could have been 22 times worse. I mean, I don't know how we would have dealt with a simultaneous overrunning of 22 bases.
Yeah.
But dealing with one was enough. So I was trying to reassure the team, like, the work that they did to get down to one base was good work. And they acted as professionals. They did everything safely. They accounted for everything properly. They really served honorably, and they should be proud of that part of what their role was, because the decisions made at the political level, we can't really control that. We can just contribute to, maybe making a really bad situation slightly less bad, and that might be all you can do as a leader. But somebody still needs to play that part and be in that role. And I've talked to other leaders that have had really difficult scenarios like that, and almost all of them agree that they'd rather have been there themselves to try to help than to pass that off onto somebody else.
I guess that's what being a leader is, though, right?
Yeah.
Just to track back to that idea of what it means to be a leader. Is a lot of young men particularly want to be leaders. There's this desire to lead, but you're saying that, if you want to be a leader, then you've also got to take the responsibility of when things fail and when they go well.
Yeah.
But also that point of, hey, this was a political decision. You've also got to be able to submit to that reality as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of layers to it.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of good outcomes in that moment.
Yeah.
So
can we speak to one thing though? Like, while you were there, I remember you mentioning to me that you were led worship in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Now, there's no churches in Afghanistan. I've read the history. It is such a dangerous place in regards to, we don't know really how many Christians there are that be underground if they are Christians. I read a little book about how there was a church being built and then it got completely destroyed. But the church was only for foreigners, essentially. It was only for ambassadors and, diplomats, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But you actually, amongst all of that, were able to worship. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, the U.S. Army has a pretty good program with chaplains and setting up chapels on bases so people can still go to worship services, to basically to go to church on the base every week, just like they would. And they support different denominations, different faith traditions, and that kind of thing. A lot of what the chaplains do is supporting people through difficult times like combat, but also personal issues. So they can be one of the sources of counsel and kind of advice and that kind of thing that the Army has baked into the system. So it's a really good program. But on every base that I've been to, we've had a chapel, and there's usually, some instruments that are already there, which is nice, a small sound system, so that if there's enough musicians that actually show up, you can lead live worship, lead people through kind of a time of worship that sometimes feels a little bit different. I remember I was in Egypt doing the same thing, and there was a time where some bad stuff was happening, and we'd had some people get injured and that type of thing, and folks from that unit came in, and it's a little bit different when people are singing and praising God and they just lost a friend or somebody who's gotten injured, and they're worried about the next mission that they might go out on, especially in the Afghan context. But I was probably busier than I'd ever been trying to plan and get ready for all this stuff. And I'd gone to the chapel and talked to the chaplain, and he was like, "Hey, our guitarist is leaving. He's going back home, and we don't have anybody, so we're probably going to just do videos and stuff like that." I was like, "Well, I can help play guitar and build the worship team and try to keep that going just for the time that we're here, because it's just a different experience when you have live music." And I love to play music, but I just didn't know how I was going to be able to do it. And I remember leaving a planning meeting, running across to the chapel, practicing real quick, running back to another meeting, and then coming back, and we had 2 services every Sunday so that people on shift work could actually attend one or the other. So we'd play twice, and then I'd go back and then, work until about 3:00 in the morning, and get everything set for the next day.
So what was your schedule? It was what time did it start in the morning?
Usually everything sort of happens at night, in a deployed context.
Right.
So, it was I think I would start about 8:00 in the morning or so. I think our first meeting was about 8:30, and then work into the night until whatever was done that we needed to get done. So some nights I was only getting 6 hours of sleep, 7-8 hours of sleep was a luxury.
But when you were awake, you were just working the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're not over there to party, I guess.
No, it was
you're in a war zone.
and it was also during that last kind of couple of months where you're not getting a lot of breaks. Some people would take a few minutes to go over to the gym and work out a little bit just to kind of refresh and then come back. I was getting to the point where I wasn't eating. I wasn't taking the time to go get food. So luckily somebody from my team, one of my sergeants who was absolutely taking care of me, would just bring me food and set it down at my desk and be like, "Hey, sir, you haven't eaten dinner yet?" And I was like, "Oh," because you don't even realize it, I think, until when you're in that situation, until your body starts to break down. You're not eating, you're not sleeping well, you're not working out, you're not, in some cases, if your spiritual health gets super weak, all these things go into creating the.
Well, can you speak to that?
Capacity.
Why would, you're so busy. So then why would it be important to make time to lead other troops in worshiping God?
I don't honestly think I had a choice. I was sitting in one of the worship services, and I could just feel God saying, "Hey, go up to the front and volunteer." And I was just obedient in that moment, because everything else in me was saying, "You don't have time for this," and it was probably true. But I felt like if you're serving God with some of your time, He's going to make the rest of your time more productive. It's a very
That's a hot
it's
tip
something
right
that
there.
I've experienced, and I think that idea is related to the way He promises if we're faithful with our money and we tithe and those kind of things, then He's going to expand the rest of our resources to cover everything that we need. And I just feel like for me, one of those resources is time. Usually that's the one that I'm running the shortest on. And especially in that context. And he was faithful. I mean, I was able to support the worship team up to a certain point, to where we had to actually shut down the chapel and take all the equipment out of it. And it was
the
even
chapel still there?
The building's probably still there on Bagram.
So
Airfield.
there is hopefully
Yeah.
there is hopefully I mean the church is not the building, but there is a remnant of where there was worship taking place in Afghanistan.
I remember it was Easter Sunday, so this was right as everything was starting to shut down, and we decided to go up on the roof of the church building, which is like a flat roof, surrounded by mountains covered in snow, and we had a sunrise worship service up on the roof. Wow. And we had speakers. Which city up there.
Was this in, sorry?
This was in Bagram Airfield, which is it's a little bit north of Kabul, so it's a few hours by car, but it's just a short flight. But yeah, the sound of the speakers echoing through the mountains, and like being able to do that even in an area where we'd had, rocket attacks and attacks on the base, being kind of out there in the open, just doing this sunrise service, I was like, this is pretty amazing. And we have some pictures of the team up there on the roof. Just it's a great memory to know that we were able to do that in a place that so much dark.
Can we see that photo?
Yeah, I can show you.
We'll put it up on the video.
Yeah.
So that's more editing, but
yeah,
I would love to see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just you feel like you're surrounded by darkness, but then there's this like you can be a light, and it's so much brighter in those dark areas. Yeah.
Light is so much darker. Light is so much brighter when there is darkness around you.
I mean, you really feel the evil around you when you're in a war zone. It's not a place where a lot of good things are happening, and just it's a whole lot more powerful. And I think about those moments, even as hard as they were, as moments where I grew a lot in my faith, in who I am as a person, who I am as a man, as a leader.
And you were doing long distance with your wife as well.
Yeah. Actually, in the first time I was in Afghanistan, we were dating remotely.
Yeah.
And that was a year that we dated basically over email, because we didn't have like video chat
crazy.
And stuff like that.
I did dating remotely for 18 months, but we saw each other every 2 months, and I didn't handle that, let alone sending emails.
Yeah, it was really amazing for us, because if you think about it, when you're with each other and you can have just like conversations about what you did today and what do you want to eat for dinner, that kind of thing, that's all well and good. But when you're remote, those conversations, you're not going to write that in an email. Like, today I had spaghetti, and like it gets boring. So you actually have to talk about the real stuff. Yeah. You have to talk about, this is what I believe in. I want kids. I want, this is where I am with my faith. This is what I want in a family. This is the type of father I want to be. I mean, and the best part about all that is because it was all email, I still have all those emails.
Yeah, I remember you saying that.
I have like a record of me and my wife's like.
We cringed looking at some of them.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I'm
so
sure.
when you got back to the US, you proposed, right?
Yeah, so we decided about halfway through to start planning our wedding. So
wow.
Pretty much proposed or said, yes, let's do this.
When you're still over there via email. So you proposed via email, technically.
Technically. There was an opportunity to use like an internet cafe thing. So there was a little bit of face-to-face. And I actually was able to call and ask Michelle's dad for permission to marry her over video chat, which, I'm in a war zone, 8,000 kilometers away. So what's he going to say, right? But I was still super nervous, and he was kind to me. He was like, hey, I'm going to stop you right there. My answer is yes. And I was like, okay. I didn't even get through half of what I was going to say.
That's good.
So it was really good, because he was very sick, and he was getting ready to end up passing away a couple months later.
Okay, yeah.
And one of the reasons for a bit of urgency was we knew we wanted to get married. We knew I was coming back in March. Let's just go ahead and get married right away so that maybe he could be at the wedding. But he helped plan the wedding and set some things up, but he actually didn't make it to the wedding because I got back. I think he died in February, late January, and I got back in March. So, but we still got married about 10 days later after I got back. So
that would have been quite emotional.
It was one of those moments where you kind of see videos of soldiers proposing and that kind of thing. So I was like, well, I need to give her this ring. I didn't
Mm.
have the ring yet. So my mom like slipped it to me. And right as I walked off the plane, I was like,
Off the plane.
yeah.
Oh, that's a Hollywood movie, right?
Yeah, it was
there.
kind of, I mean, I think as a man, if you're proposing, you're trying to think of an emotional high moment that you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
manufacture. And I was
I
like,
stuffed that in my.
I was like, there's no other emotional, I couldn't top this.
When I
moment.
proposed, there were people around, and like in my mind, it was this beautiful spot. There was like a wedding happening, and there was just people sitting like going for a walk in the park. I was like, oh, this is a fail. But hey, we're still married. So
Nah, it worked out.
So with your wife, something I noticed with you, and I've looked up some stats. I can't quote them specifically, but the rate of divorce in the army is a lot higher than a lot of other professions. And something that I've noticed is, well, you have to move around a lot, and it demands a lot of who you are. But something I've noticed by getting to know you and getting to know your wife, and even when you're away, just the way she holds herself, I can imagine that would be really hard when you're away for those long periods of time. Yeah. What's the secret? Like, because really on paper, many of those that are in the army, their marriages aren't great. Their families are, suffering as a result. Yeah. What would you say the secret has been for you as a family?
I think it helps to kind of acknowledge that marriages, relationships are not designed to function when people are apart. Like being together is way better, way easier. That is something that we really value, our time that we can spend together. And you almost have to prepare for those moments when you're apart, and you have to invest in that time while you are together, so you're ready for those moments apart. It takes a special person. I mean, I really think that my wife God picked her for me. Like he picked me for her, and we complement each other in such a, supernatural, divine
You're
way.
A team.
We're absolutely a team, and we could have never found each other on our own. Like, I was born in Virginia on the east coast of the U.S., and she was born in California on the
There's no Tinder
very
back
far
then,
west.
or like online dating.
No online dating. The chances of us even meeting each other, we met in Colorado, so like right in the middle. The chance of us kind of getting together just was, astronomically small, and it just kind of reinforced to both of us, that we're meant to be together. We were, God has a plan for us together. So he brought us together for something that he wants to do through both of us. And we're on that journey. I mean, now we're in Australia together, and I think he's building in us something that we're going to use for the next place that we go. And that's the way it always is. So we move around so much. We build community, we build relationships. Sometimes we're really serving, really pouring into the community, and sometimes we're on the receive mode. And we're being poured into, and we're being built up for that next mission.
Just on that, like, you do a lot. I imagine your job's quite demanding, and you also go away for periods of time. Yet, I'm the one that rosters you to pick up the trailer. I think you're on tomorrow, aren't you?
I'm on tomorrow.
Yeah. So something I noticed in you is like a lot of people that have very demanding careers or big responsibilities. Like at the end of the day, like you have a lot on your plate, and I think a lot of even Christians would be like, well, my job is my purpose and it's my ministry or whatever. And that's true. Like your job is part of that. But something I've noticed in you is you're so willing to serve in the context of the local church, when really you probably have every reason not to be, in terms of the amount that's on your plate. Is that whole concept that you mentioned before around putting God first and knowing that he'll multiply the effectiveness of your time? Like, can you speak to that for a second? Because I think that's something I've really seen in you.
Some of it is just like pure obedience. Because there's certainly times where I'm approached to help out with something, and I'm like, I don't think I can do this. I need to be obedient to it, though, because I know this is from God. And I think there's a practice in that as well, as like to be faithful, to do things that you said you were going to do. Like, I said I was going to volunteer. I said I was going to help my church. I want to be a part of this. And then actually turning that into action. But yeah, and then trusting God that he'll multiply the time that you have. You've contributed to some volunteer effort or maybe it's a relationship or something that grows out of that. Because that's part of how he might want to use me within the community or within the church. People I would have never met if I wasn't serving, or people who, need someone to talk to that maybe they don't have anybody else to talk to. So it's just being in the right place where God puts me, and then be ready for whatever the task is that he's going to ask me to do. And the key part of that is to be ready. It's almost like to be expecting something to happen. It's the same way that I operate within the Army context. Is every school that I've ever been to, every experience, every training event is helping me to be ready for that hard moment.
Right, preparation. Like you're ready.
And if you're not taking your training time or your preparation time seriously, then you won't be ready for that hard moment, and you won't be the person that somebody picks to go into that hard moment to lead.
That just makes me think, like, when I was moved to Canberra originally, and I was like, essentially, I felt like I was going backwards career-wise because I came here to pretty much get married. And I took out a barista job. No offense to baristas, it's still a good job. But at the time, I felt like I had more to offer because I was sort of over hospitality, and I'd done a bit of a more meaningful job in Adelaide. But I just felt like God was saying, you need to be faithful in the little things. And I feel like what you're saying is, if you want to be a great leader, or you want to be an effective, worker, or even just a good husband, or whatever it is, like, then it starts right now. Like, you've got to be prepared for that moment. You don't just wake up one day and you're then leading 600 to 800 people. Like, that's something that you grow into. Yeah.
I think it's also kind of if you look at it that way, it takes some of the fear out of it as well, because you're building up in small increments. You're building capacity a little bit at a time, and then you're thinking about the things that you invest your time in, and maybe choices you made that weren't correct in the past. You can learn from that, as long as you acknowledge, like, hey, I made a mistake. You're honest with yourself. You're like, hey, I made a mistake. I'm going to do it better the next time, and then you actually put a plan in place to do something different. I think that all builds capacity over time, and then you're kind of surprised when you reach that moment and you're like, okay, I am the lead for this, and I feel ready for it.
Yeah, right.
I'm not nervous. I am the right person for this, and not because I think I am. It's because I put in all this work, and then you reflect on the time that you've spent preparing, and you can take that same kind of idea and apply it to a team. If you invest in your team and you learn about your team and you learn about individuals and their skills and their strengths and weaknesses, and you build trust, and then your team's ready. You don't want to go into a situation where you're going to be really tested without a lot of confidence in your team that your team's going to win, because you're not there for anything else.
What do you do, like, on the daily? So, there's this real obsession, I think, of a lot of people like to know people's daily routines, or and I always laugh because if I made Instagram videos of my daily routine, like, there'd be some days it'd be like, yeah, follow this, and other days when I'm rolling out of bed and, like, pretty ill-disciplined, if I'm honest. So I don't want someone to ask me what my morning routine is. But for you, like, what are the important things that shape you every day that you do?
I'm probably a little bit more like you. I have I'm one of. Actually, the more Army officers I talk to, it's a little bit of everything. Like, there's some people that have a very strict routine. They, 5 a.m. wake up, go to the gym, this and that every single day.
That's my mind. That's my mind when I think of a military person.
And that's sort of what I always compared myself to as well. And I felt guilty if I didn't do stuff like that, because it's the model that results in a good leader does these things type of thing. I think that's good to have that model, because it gives me something to work towards, even though I think the way that I work and the way that my mind works and the way that, I've just never been able to achieve that kind of regular routine. I do like to vary things. Like, I'll take a different road to work. I'll use a different process to get to the same end state. I like to try different methods and different approaches to things and find out what's working for that particular moment, what's better for that problem I'm trying to solve. So a lot of it is that's the way I almost live my life almost naturally, is like, okay, I need to do this. So what do I need to do to be prepared for that moment?
Because as a logistics guy, you'd think you'd be pretty methodical at that.
Yeah. Well, I think logistics is like it's like a puzzle that you're trying to solve, and somebody's always moving the pieces around and changing the pattern and changing the problem and changing when it's due. And so it's like an ever evolving puzzle that you're trying to constantly solve and put back together.
So is there some things like for you, I'm just trying to be specific here, like family time or time with God? Like what are the things that you really prioritize? Time with your wife? Because a lot of people are very busy. And I imagine you're quite busy. Like,
yeah, it turns into, like
on?
you said, priorities. It turns into having things that I know are priorities and then sticking to those. When I have a decision to make, using those priorities as a
like
way
a
to
principle
make the
in a sense.
Yeah.
Like, okay, my wife is priority, my kids are priority. So that's a no, that's a yes.
Yeah.
My faith is a priority. I'm going to pick up a trailer at 8 o'clock in the morning and make sure it's there at 8:30 because this is a priority for me.
Yep.
But watching this show or catching up with this person might not be within those priorities. Like,
yeah. And I think a lot of it comes down to, we talked about this last night at LifeCom actually. When I have the choice of what to do with my time, I choose based on those priorities. Sometimes you don't have the choice because your work's going to tell you got to be at a certain place. You got to deploy for a year. You got to,
especially in the Army. Yeah.
That's what you've signed up for. But there are moments where you have a choice. And I promised Michelle, I've told her this a bunch of times. I was like, if I ever have a choice between work and family, I'm going to pick family. Because there's a lot of times where I don't have a choice and I'm going to have to go with what work tells me to do.
Is there a temptation though, like in your journey with your career, like has there been a temptation where, okay, I might, if I pick career here, my manager or my commander, they're going to be happier with me.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to get a promotion.
Yeah.
How do you balance that?
I think about it and you're right. There's a temptation to go and know that this, if I do this in this moment, it's going to help my career. I think the way I balance it is I don't think of my career as something that I have to create or that I have to maintain or that I have to do something to keep it going. I think that God has me in my particular profession for a reason. He's going to open these next opportunities and put me in places of higher responsibility if that's what he wants me to do. And if not, if he wants me to retire out of the military and go do something else, then that's kind of the direction that things will go.
So you're not looking to your career as like your defining priority. It's God's my defining priority, and His will is for me to do this role.
Yeah.
If that changes, I'm willing to change.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, my greatest fear, I think for a lot of people, especially my generation, is like you can have the career, but then be like this depressed 6-year-old eating cold meals because your family doesn't like you. You've become the CEO of a company, but no one even,
and
you don't have one to go home to.
Unfortunately, I've seen a few like marriages that fall apart at the end of somebody's military career because they decide, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but they've picked work too many times over family.
And you decide not to do that.
Yeah, and another like secret for all the like young people that want to be married or young married couples out there is that if you both have faith in God, God's going to lead you down a path together. He's not going to ever put something on my heart that takes me away from my wife because he's put something else on her heart. He's not going to lead us apart. So it's almost like a superpower you have as a married couple is you can compare these things that are on your heart to each other, and you can kind of gauge whether it's from God or if it's just something that you want to do out of your own, like maybe selfishness or your own ambition. And
selfish ambition.
Yeah. I mean, that's just, having that almost like a test of what is from God and what's not. And then knowing that He's always going to lead us down a path together. He wants to use us together in anything that He puts in front of us. It's amazing. And I know that not every relationship is like that, but I've seen it work in my decisions around my career, that kind of thing. Like it's always, even the decision to come to Australia, it's something that we made together so that.
Well, even just think of Michelle, the way she's blessed our church, and particularly like the way that she loves to make food and things like that.
Yeah.
And like on Mother's Day, she was asked to make a cake because we knew she would enjoy it. And we rocked up and it was just like this whole table full of like, there was this carrot cake that was like probably weighed a couple of kilos. It was that many layers. Like, and so you're saying that whenever God calls you to do something, it's always together. and you trust that it'll bring you together and it will serve a purpose. It's not just you being in Australia, okay, because it's your career, therefore it's about you. It's like, no, it's both of you. Like Michelle has a mission here as well. There are people that she's going to connect with, and it's God's will is that you would do that together. He's not going to draw you apart,
right?
Because he values your marriage beyond,
And you hear stories about people like, well, the reason why we got divorced was because, I think we're just on two different paths.
Yep.
That's not coming from God. He's not going to lead you down those two different paths.
Right.
And so I think that's just something that, in a world where you can't know what the future is going to hold, it's hard to make decisions. It gives you a little bit of that like gift of discernment in the decisions that you're making, what is coming from God and what's not. And, all of us have these selfish kind of ambitions and worldly desires and things like that. And some of them are good. Like I want to go, do this career path because it's going to make a lot of money, and then I'm going to use that money to help people.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah,
But if that's not something that he's putting on us to do as a team, me and my wife, then I don't want to go down that path and, chase something that maybe on the outside looks like a virtuous type thing.
Because you're someone that has been so successful in your career, and you've moved so many places and you've had different roles, and career is probably one of the biggest questions young people have. Like, I remember being in my early 20s and just thinking like, I'm so lost that I don't know what I want to do. Like, what would your advice be to someone who is trying to figure out what they should do?
Probably to do something.
Yeah.
Like, you kind of alluded to taking small steps, and I think I was even like last year around this time, I was thinking about whether or not I'd be selected for battalion command. I was thinking about how much longer I might be in the Army, because most of us do about a 20-year career and then we retire and go do something else. And I actually wasn't doing a very good job in my day-to-day job because I was spending all this time thinking about the future. And
that's a lesson.
And I thought, you know what? Today I need to go to work and do my job today.
You need to be faithful.
I need to be faithful in what I've said I was going to do today, and be present with the people that I work with my team that I have today, and make sure I'm investing in what they're working on right now. And I don't need to spend my entire life thinking about trying to predict the future or trying to, position myself so that I'm at a better advantage for the next thing, or that future that I've done the work to get to the place where I am now. If I'm selected for the next job, that's great. That's a blessing. That's something that I think God wants me to go do. If not, then there's a lot of other things that I love that I'd be super interested in doing that maybe God wants me to go serve in a different way, in a different profession. All those future outcomes are good, but I think the advice would be like, if you're in a place and you're doing a job now, do a very good job at that. Continue to build the capacity for the next, maybe more challenging moment. Because if you're ready for that moment, then you're going to be pulled into the next level of higher responsibility. You're going to be trusted with more resources. Maybe you're going to build a team around you and you can lead that team. But it starts with just being faithful with what's been given to you today, and working in that moment without trying to, shape the future too much.
That's what the Bible says, is that principle of being faithful in what's in your hands so that you're entrusted with more. You're not going to be ready for it.
Yeah.
But I think when you're younger, you're trying to think 10 years ahead or whatever, which is actually partly the reason why I didn't join defense, because I was like, I don't want to give up 8 years of my life.
Yeah.
But your advice is start somewhere.
And I had wise counsel too. I mean, that's the other part of that. Like, I was my dad, his dad, my church family, my mom is a great advisor. My wife advises me. There's been a lot of leaders in the Army that have given me advice that have strong faith, and I know that their advice is coming from a place of godly wisdom, not just worldly wisdom. And I really trust what they had to say about me as a leader, and that just helps you develop this firm foundation so that if something happens, you're not knocked off balance by every single thing that happens around you, or somebody attacks you. You actually are stable and you can handle that moment, because you know who you are, and God tells you who you are, and that's your identity. It's not Your identity isn't something that you've manufactured and that you're trying to preserve. And it's almost like the story about yourself that's not true, that you're trying to like convince everybody is true. It's really fragile. So it took me a lot of years to get to the point where I feel like I'm rooted in who I am and who I am as a professional, but also as just a Christian and a father and a husband. And I think if you can get to that point where you have a solid foundation, it takes, it took me about 10 years, 12 years. I'm still working on parts of the foundation, but you can weather storms that you didn't realize that you'd be able to. And that's kind of that's what's prepared me for those moments where it's a really hard, terrible situation. But somebody needs to lead a team through that and make decisions between two bad outcomes. One of them slightly less bad.
Just lastly, I like to hand people a way that they can sort of continue to grow and learn. And so I always ask people, is there a book or a resource that you've read that's shaped you? It can be more than one, that you would encourage people to go and read that's impacted your life and made you the person that you are today. You can say the Bible, but I'm assuming that's a given.
Yeah, I mean, somebody gave me, I was actually in my last unit, and the chaplain gave me a Bible that was like, it's a leadership Bible. It's a Maxwell product, and it's got leadership lessons throughout the Bible. It's been really good to read through and kind of think about some of it. I mean, I've just never thought about leadership in that context, and it helps to revitalize you when you're in charge of something and you're feeling pretty worn down. That is a good resource to go back to. But I think for me, trying to continue to read and study and learn, almost like this journey of lifelong learning on how to apply new ideas and not new ideas, but some of them are very old ideas, but just understanding how people think, how you think, how people have led successfully in the past. I think as a logistician in my early years, I was always thinking about future technology and future ways of doing logistics better, like some of these big companies that do it. But it wasn't until halfway through my career I started looking at history and figuring out why things are the way they are and how did we get to this point, and what are some theories behind warfare in general, like what is warfare, and really understanding my profession at a really deep level so that I can be more effective in the unknown future scenarios that I'm going to be put into. So I think I won't say any really specific books because a lot of them are really specific to my profession, but like understanding why your profession exists, understanding the origin of it, and put it into context with other things that maybe aren't your profession. Like mine is logistics to do what? It's supporting war fighting. So what is war fighting? So I have to know about the thing that I'm not doing. I have to know about the thing that I'm supporting a lot more than I need to know about the science of what I'm doing. So just thinking more broadly and being interested in learning about things that maybe aren't your job, but it's surrounding your job. Things that you interact with, and you can have better conversations with other professionals if you're aware of kind of what their problems they're facing and how you interact with them.
Oh, cool. So the leadership, what was the name of the Bible? The Leadership Bible?
It's the Maxwell Leadership Bible.
Maxwell Leadership. And your encouragement is understand history, continue to read, continue to learn within your field. Yeah. That's good advice.
And you're never going to get to a point where you should never get to a point where you stop reading and stop learning because you think you know it all. Because it's not possible. And if you do get to that point, you might want to consider doing something else.
Yeah,
because you're going to stagnate and become kind of, instead of a positive influence for growth and development, you become that kind of unmovable stone that's in the way of progress and growth, and you're kind of like dragging the team down, and knowing when that moment happens, because it probably happens for everybody eventually, and being able to step out of the way and let the next leader kind of come up and take your spot. I think that's part of kind of selfless servant leadership as well.
Mate, could talk a lot longer.
Yeah.
But I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your story, and continue to hang out with you for that until May, and then maybe we'll be over in the US at some point.
Come on over. Yeah.
But yeah, look forward to seeing the way that God's going to use you. And just want to say what I've noticed from you. I've already sort of hashed on it, but just the way you prioritize your faith and your family, and the way you honor God in your role, rather than something I always look for is that the job is not someone's identity. It's something that they do to serve God, and I can see that in you. And I'm encouraged because I can see the fruit in your family as well, that you do have a good marriage and a family, and you've prioritized that. And I think a lot of people are looking for that. Like, how can I imitate someone who's been able to make a significant impact in whatever way it is within their field, but at the same time prioritize their family and even their local church that they're a part of in serving people. So thanks for who you are and what you do, and thanks for picking the trailer up tomorrow.
Yeah, no problem. It's basically logistics, so it's what I do.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cool.